Two Chinese women, 31 and 29, both subjects are strolling down the streets of Manhattan when another woman demands them to remove their face masks. After refusing, both subjects are violently attacked by a hammer. This is a recent example of the fierce xenophobia plaguing this nation since 1882. In the words of Desmond Tutu, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, then you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Everyone in America has a responsibility to advocate for equality and justice. Complacency means that you have chosen the side of ignorance. I am Chinese and have faced racism myself. This issue is not talked about enough in society, and through my observation and research, I will bring it to light. Though xenophobia in America is still prevalent today, it stems back 139 years and must be taken more seriously. So I will discuss America's first Anti-Immigration Act, which was directed towards Chinese immigrants, xenophobic sentiment commenced through U.S. hegemony, and recent anti-Chinese hate crimes. So let's get into the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first Anti-Immigration Act, which was the result of racism and xenophobia. It was the first step that America took towards prohibiting immigration, and the rhetoric surrounding Chinese immigrants was incredibly discriminatory. Susquehanna University scholar Grace Dunnigan in 2017 writes that Chinese immigrants were laborers who were willing to work longer hours for shorter pay. Because of this, they became more attractive in a business sense, which led to them being hired over Americans, which in turn demonized them for stealing their jobs. Dunnigan also writes that the American perception of Chinese settlements across the U.S. were that Chinese immigrants smoked opium, engaged in prostitution, and gambled, even though it was not true. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first law promoting anti-immigration rhetoric and birthed a racist outlook towards Chinese people. So now that we've seen how anti-Chinese rhetoric was born in America, let's take a look at how it intensified during the 1900s. So communist victory in China and America's McCarthyism did not mix well during the 1950s, promoting xenophobic and racist propaganda towards Chinese people. So McCarthyism was an anti-communistic ideology that persecuted innocent people for allegedly being communists. This was perpetuated by Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy. So in 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Party successfully defeated Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists in the Chinese Civil War. The United States did not take lightly to this and responded in a harsh manner. And PBS writer Charlotte Brooks in 2019 writes that after the People's Republic of China entered the Korean War, Chinese Americans' unique history of exclusion and political marginalization left the community unusually vulnerable to the kind of public hysteria that Joseph McCarthy and his allies fostered. So because America already had this discriminatory sentiment towards Chinese people, McCarthyism furthered that rhetoric and engaged in fascist practices to paint both Chinese people and China as enemies. So since we firmly grasped the ideals that intensified anti-Chinese sentiment in America during the 1900s, let's take a look at where we are today. So xenophobia is still widely present in America today, and this issue needs to be addressed. Lily Zhang, Stanford alumni and writer for Harvard Business Review in 2021, says that xenophobia and racism accompanies the ongoing persecution of Chinese academics, scientists, and business people, often on unfounded charges of spying due to their association with the Chinese Communist Party. And history often repeats itself, but we have the agency to choose how. We must all rally around the Chinese American and East Asian communities being targeted today and support sentiments under direct attack from racist violence. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, neoliberal and conservative politicians were quick to point fingers at China, even calling the coronavirus the Kung flu. Hate crimes against Chinese people and Asians assumed to be Chinese people across major U.S. cities rose exponentially, demonstrating the fact that America is still xenophobic and still holds that sentiment. Also, Chinese scholars and immigrants in America are being denied visas for no solid reason and even being accused of espionage. So due to the ongoing xenophobic rhetoric and stigma, we can see that hate crimes prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic and racist politics were directly influenced by the historic racism and discrimination towards Chinese people. So now that we've seen the beginning traces of anti-Chinese sentiment, its intensification, and how both aspects play a part of the xenophobic trends of today, let's conclude. In conclusion, America's xenophobic and xenophobic history, stemming back 139 years, is unacceptable and must be acknowledged by society. We looked at the birth of xenophobia in America during the late 1800s, its intensification during the 1900s, and how all that built up to the discrimination prevalent today, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ignorance is a choice, and as a society, we can choose to open our minds to equality and acceptance.